But let's continue. Sarah and I, we watched a movie the other night, and as we were watching the movie, notice that the more movies you watch, the more predictable it gets, right? For as many movies as there are out there actually seem to be very few actual genres, right? It goes for books as well. Books generally stay into one particular category. Although for some reason or other, books tend to have the ability to be a little more unpredictable than movies do. I'm not really sure why, but that seems to be my experience as I read. But we'll notice that virtually every story that we have related to us, in some form or another, they tend to fit into a very small group of categories. Comedy, tragedy, thriller, mystery, right? Romance. And then we combine it. We say romantic comedy, right? Suspenseful thriller. Although I'm not really sure what the difference is between an action movie and a suspenseful movie. I think it's splitting hairs there. I'll give you an example, all right? You tell me if this sounds familiar. Okay? See, tell me if you've seen this in any movies or TV shows recently, right? An FBI agent has been tracking a terrorist cell for some time now. He hears rumors of a nuclear threat to New York City. They capture a suspect and receive confirmation that it's about to happen. It's not just a rumor, and it's going to happen today. This fact vaults the story into a series of car chases and shootouts, and somehow the agent's partner ends up getting shot, right? The agent gets a good look at the suspect, and he can't pursue them because he must tend to his partner. Despair is beginning to set in. They're never going to stop them in time. Then suddenly there's a break in the case. There's another dramatic car chase and a shootout. The terrorist has the agent at gunpoint, but suddenly at the last moment the agent turns the tables. And finally the terrorist is dealt with. And we're led to believe that is the end of the story. But the terrorist's last words are that it's already too late. And he's already set the timer on the bomb. See, I can get really deep today because of this voice thing. He's already set the timer on the bomb, and our hero rushes into the bomb, only to see precious seconds left, and they're ticking away fast. And even though there's only 10 seconds on the timer, somehow the movie continues to go on for 60 more seconds, right? The bomb squad is surely not going to get there in time, so our hero has no choice, right, but to recklessly try to do it himself. But which one should he cut? The red one, the green one, the blue one, the yellow one. He closes his eyes and gets ready to cut the green one. But then at the very last moment he switches. He cuts the blue one. Eyes closed and flinching. Our hero slowly opens his eyes and lets out a sigh of relief as he sees the timer to have about 1 second left. All is saved, and we all let out a collective breath with our hero. Sound familiar?
24.
24. I made it up completely. Didn't even have a particular movie in mind. But we hear this over and over again, right? Same basic storyline. Maybe it's a little different if it's a romance, right? The girl loses the guy, gets the guy, loses the guy, wants the guy, she can't have it, in the end gets the guy, right? Okay. We've gotten so used to it that many movies have actually started letting the bomb go off. They're like, oh, they know it's going to go off they know he's going to stop in 1 second, so we got to let it blow up. Right? And so now that's becoming predictable. You're almost like, well, it's going to blow up now. Yeah. But the star is not actually at the place, right? But somebody close to the star. Why are so many stories so similar to this? Why do all these movies seem just like the other? Well, no matter how many times we see the same story played out, drama and suspense are always exciting, aren't they? We always keep paying to go back to these movies. We always end up continuing to read the books that sound a lot like the last one we read, because it's exciting. We enjoy being left on the end of our seats. Even if we go into a romantic movie, it has dramatic twists that leave us clenching our armrests or crying. Not me. The timer never, ever, ever stops with 15 minutes left, does it? Because 15 minutes isn't exciting. 10 seconds, now that's exciting. If the rescue is not in the 11th hour, then we begin to question whether it was an actual valid danger in the first place, and whether they even needed to be rescued. Come on, 15 minutes isn't that exciting, is it? Suspense is fun. Unless the suspense isn't fictional, but it's real. Not distant, but close. Not on TV, but in my life. I don't want to be saved at the 11th hour. I want to be saved in the first hour. Right? In fact, I don't even want to be in a situation where I need to be saved at all. Look at your life today and ask yourselves, what would you consider to be drama in your life? What kind of things in your life would you consider to be suspense that's causing you stress? Maybe it's a bill that's upcoming. Maybe it's health that might be fading. Children. Many other things, right? Maybe it's the two kids sleeping on the back there. I don't know. Hey, they're awake. No, they're not in trouble. Don't worry. Our lives, if we put them next to the movie, we would be like, this is a boring movie. There's no drama there. Yet, the much smaller scale of drama in our real lives is a lot harder to deal with. It's a lot harder to bear with than the suspense-filled drama that was in the movie. That man in the movie can stare out a gun, but I'm having a sure hard time staring down my family as that pressure mounts. In reality, the fake drama of the movie can't take a stand to the suspense and stress of our own lives. Drama has its place, and its place is not in my life. It's in the movies. Maybe that's why we enjoy dramatic movies so much. We like them because it's someone else's problem. Someone else is dealing with the suspense and it isn't me. I don't have to worry about it. How do we respond to such worry in our lives when the suspense that really wouldn't qualify as suspense in the movie meets us? Well, many of us turn to God, right, in prayer. Or we turn to the church. We cry out to Him in our moment of need. But how many times, when we cry out to God, do we open our eyes and find ourselves in the same situation unchanged? How many times do we, like in Psalm chapter 13, like David, go, where are you? How long will you hide yourself from me? Psalm chapter 40, verse 17, it says, you are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God. This seems to be a recurrent theme in the book of Psalms, doesn't it? God is our deliverer. But how many times does He wait until the very last moment, the 11th hour, to do His delivering? In the book of 2 Kings, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, he was on the warpath. Just a short 7 years ago, he had conquered the nation of Israel to the north. He had all the peoples of Israel. He had them exiled, taken out of their homes, sent them to other lands, and he repopulated their lands. He repopulated their lands with peoples from other countries. The land of the northern kingdom, Israel, was no more. Nobody could stand against the army of Assyria. But Sennacherib, do you think he was content to stop with Israel? No, he wanted to keep going, didn't he? That's what he was doing. He was coming for the land of Judah. Judah, of course, reeled in fear, didn't they? As Sennacherib approached. Hezekiah, the king of Judah, he tried desperately to appease the king. He sent him silver and he sent him gold. Please, please, just stay away. We'll pay you tribute. But The thing about power is you always want more, don't you? And so Sennacherib was not content with just silver and gold. He wanted Judah. Before long, the very great army of the Assyrians stood before the very gates of the capital of Judah. Hundreds of thousands of battle-hardened Assyrians waiting just outside. The spokesman for the Assyrian army approached. He comes up to the very gate of Jerusalem as they're all locked inside, shivering with fear. He ridicules the people. He threatens them with certain destruction. You are so foolish. He calls them to abandon their king, give up hope, and surrender to Assyria. You won't be harmed if you only surrender. Everything seemed hopeless. Judah was not nearly as powerful as all the other countries that were already conquered. Now, what kind of king was Hezekiah described as in the Bible? Good king or bad king? He's described as a pretty good king, right? 2 Kings chapter 18:5 says, He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those before him. And then in verse 7, And the Lord was with him. Wherever he went out, he prospered. So if this is the case, if Hezekiah is a good king, good Christian, a spiritual person as we see in Galatians, right? If this is the case, then why hasn't God already delivered him? Why didn't God save him before they even crossed the border of Judah? Why has he waited until they're standing at the doorstep of Jerusalem itself? Hezekiah has been faithful long before this, so it's not unreasonable to think that surely he's prayed to God about this long before this. I mean, that is a pretty good description of Hezekiah, isn't it? And it was recorded before the events of the day took place. So with an army at his door, Hezekiah again goes to God in prayer. But this time God answers. This time he sends his prophet Isaiah to speak to Hezekiah. Turn over with me to 2 Kings chapter 19. 2 Kings chapter 19, starting in verse 32. 2 Kings chapter 19, starting in verse 32. This is only a small portion of Isaiah's response. Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, He shall not come into this city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way that he came, by the same way he shall return. And he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord. For I will defend this city and save it, for my own sake, and for the sake of my servant David. And that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went home and lived in Nineveh. And as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch, his god, Adramelech and Sherezer, his son, struck him down with a sword and escaped into the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place. For some reason, this seems to be the pattern that God uses in response to the cry of his people. Does he ever save? Does he save them when they cry out? Yes. Yes. Does God answer our prayers when we cry out? Yes. But he always seems to wait until the last possible second to do it. Would it be unreasonable for God to have done this before they even crossed the border of Judah? Couldn't God have made this situation a whole lot easier by having Sennacherib assassinated by his sons before he goes out on the warpath? Doesn't our life so many times feel the same way? When we see that God has answered, it's almost always He answered at the last moment. That much needed inflow of cash comes the day before it's due rather than a week. Children scare us to death as they don't simply walk the line, but they cross it. and then not until all hope is lost does the rescue come. Why? First of all, when is deliverance? We can't be delivered until there is first something to be delivered from. When Assyria conquered the northern kingdom, Judah was not in need of deliverance. When Sennacherib set his eyes upon Judah was not in need of deliverance. When that great army crossed the very border into the country of Judah, they were not in need of deliverance. Even when hundreds of thousands were standing before their door, they still did not need deliverance. At what point in time was Judah in need? Not until the very moment that raging army was about to attack. God did not act until they were in a very real place of danger, because they weren't in danger before. He decimated the Syrian army the night before they would have attacked. Judah was never in danger. It didn't require deliverance until there was a very real danger. Deliverance is not deliverance unless it is the 11th hour. Step back and think for a moment. Maybe you're thinking of, prayers God has answered. All right? And He waited for the last moment to think of it. All right. How many of the prayers that we think of that God has answered, do we go, He waited till the last moment to answer? And how many times do we think, God answered that problem when it was solved long before it became a problem? We don't generally think of that because it wasn't a problem yet. So it wasn't God answering a prayer. It was just things working out. Do you see part of the problem there? Okay. If it's not the 11th hour, who gets the credit? Not God. That's generally the way it works in our lives. It's hard to think of ways that God has answered prayers that weren't the 11th hour because we think, it just worked out. In Judah, the only danger that they were ever in was a perceived and an imagined danger. The only thing that had the reach to inflict any real harm upon Judah was their own imagined fears and anxieties. No sword ever came near. No spear ever touched them. It was their fears and anxieties, the only thing that could do them harm. God reaches down and gives us the grace to survive and even to thrive in the midst of trials. But what we really desire is that God would give us the grace to endure long before we ever actually have a need for endurance. We desire for danger, threats, and troubles to never actually get close enough to need to rely on God. We want God to provide in a way that we don't really need God to provide. God, I know I will be going through the high waters, right? Isaiah 43, we keep going on with that. I know I'm going to go through the high waters, but why aren't you giving me the grace to get through the high waters yet? Because you're not yet drowning. Why would you need the grace to get through the high waters if you're not in the high waters? We can't expect to receive the grace of peace in order to be saved from drowning until we are actually in danger of drowning. God is a God of the 11th hour because He lives in this current moment, not in the next. He gives us what we need for today. And tomorrow will provide for tomorrow. But we're not like that. We don't like living in the moment, do we? We like to live in the next moment. fearful of what might happen. We want to live our lives wearing a life jacket, even though we won't be within a mile of water until next week. And that isn't just a matter of looking silly, but wearing a life jacket inhibits your movement, and it keeps us from being able to live in this moment now. I can't have grace for today and have grace for tomorrow. I can have grace for today and have faith for tomorrow. I can have grace for today, or I can have grace for tomorrow. God teaches us that we should live in the grace that we have been given for this moment, and trust that He will continue to provide the grace that is needed for the next. Whatever challenges lie ahead, we will be given grace for them when those challenges come, but not before. Think about the story of Jesus and Lazarus. Lazarus is sick, and Jesus receives news of it. He then waits 2 days to come. By the time he shows up, Lazarus is dead and buried for 4 days. Do you know what Jesus had to say for himself? Jesus, why are you so late? He's already dead. Jesus says, for your sake, I'm glad that I wasn't there, so that you may believe. You're glad you weren't there? Don't you realize, Jesus, there were some high waters? What do you mean you're glad you weren't there? Even though Lazarus died, Jesus was not late. God's plan was for something better. Lazarus would breathe again. Wouldn't that be frustrating to hear, though? God, where are you? Right? You're in the place of David. God, why are you leaving me here? Come, please. I'm glad I'm not there. God is always teaching and preparing us. But His teaching and preparing are never without His providing. What would life look like if every time I got to the 11th hour, that I was able to be completely free of fear and stress, and be able to go through the 11th hour full of peace, because I understand that God has promised to provide in that moment? What if I realize that in reality there's no such thing as the 11th hour? There is only perfect timing. What if you become so familiar with God's presence and His work that when you came upon those fearful moments, it wasn't danger that you saw, but it was the coming of His presence. That familiar aroma. I know He's right around the corner. I've been here before, and the waves have not overcome me yet. This is a familiar place, and God is always easiest to be found right here. Remember a couple weeks ago when I told you Sarah my story? Do you know how many 11th hour deliverances we've been through? Do you also realize that most of them did not feel like deliverances when we were experiencing them? They felt like things were falling apart. It wasn't until we got through them and we looked back that we realized that there was God's ever-faithful hand. God is always at His best when things seem to be at their worst. And we stress seem to be. This is where He shows Himself to be true and where He never lets us down. No matter where we stand today, we can stand in peace in the knowledge of the love of our Father. The most harm that we can experience is the harm of our own fears spinning out of control. There is no danger while the army approaches. Not even when the army stands at our doorstep are we in danger. We are not in danger until that army steps out against us. In that moment, we will always find God standing true. If we practice a faith that trusts, we will find grace for that moment too. Do not let our fears and anxieties strip away the grace that God has given you for this moment. Fear and anxiety acts a lot like a paint remover. God paints His grace on, and we tear it all off. God will always come through. He is never far away. Do not fear. Deliverance awaits.